Happy Sunday night. Happy 2021. I am your host, Wes, of the Breaking Conservative, and I am thrilled to be joined by my brother, John,
Hey,
here.
hey.
Hey, John, good to see you. Always a pleasure to have you on the show, my friend. And then Josh from Saving Elephants podcast. Josh has become a regular on our show, and we are always thrilled to have him as well. So, Josh, good to see you, buddy. Welcome to
Thrilled to be here.
hmm So, 2021 has gotten off to an amazing start for me. Definitely unexpected, but it started with the COVID virus. So, if you guys remember when we did our show last Sunday, I was drinking ginger ale, which I've actually thrown away. So, I downed pretty much an entire bottle of ginger ale um, during our last show, and I was feeling pretty crappy, and I started to feel better after a couple days, and I told my boss, "Hey, I was going to come in." He's like, "Nah, man, you need to get tested because you were at a meeting where a bunch of folks tested positive." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess that did happen." And he was like, "Yep, you need to get tested before you come back in." And sure enough, it came back positive. And so my wife has gotten tested. My kids haven't had really any symptoms, but I assume they've had it. And they basically, I drove up on the military base, and then there's two guys waiting for you. One takes your information down, and the other one takes this long, thin silver rod, and he's like, "I want you to relax, and I want you to exhale." And I was like, and he's like, "Close your eyes," and I was like, "Okay, exhale," and then immediately just shoved it up my nose, and I got a COVID tracing app, a bunch of phone calls, and the funniest one was the doctor. He was a major, which is the same rank as me. He was. He called me to go over my results, and he was like, "Yeah, you came back positive." He's like, "Any idea where you could have gotten it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was in a meeting with about six guys, and I think, five of them have tested positive." He's like, "Were you guys wearing masks?" And I was like, "Yep." And he's like, "Can y'all were distanced?" And I was like, "Yeah, we were sitting in the big room. We were sitting, several chairs apart." And he was just like, "Huh, it's almost like it doesn't work or something." I'm pretty sure you're not the first person to think that. It made me think of what's the Ocean's 11, Ocean's 12 movie where like Brad Pitt is talking to his protege, and he's like, "It's like these crystals don't even work." So yeah, we were at home. We were isolating. My wife, like I said, she's got tested. She's waiting on hers, but I'm sure it's going to be positive. And staying at home with her kids. So I'm always excited to do this show. I'm super excited because I actually get to talk to somebody above the age of 4 who's not my wife, because we've had nothing but time for the past week and a half, and it's been fun. But at the same time, it's cool to talk to other adults as well. So it's good to see you guys.
Wes, you actually look like you're feeling better than when we were on here last week.
Yeah, you look good.
At this point, it's more of a precaution. It's interesting because we're actually hoping that my wife tests positive, because then it's based upon symptoms. If she tests negative, then they have to default to she could still get it, even though she had symptoms. And that would mean that she has to isolate for 2 more weeks, which she does not want to do. She's ready to go back to work and stuff. So we're actually hoping, weirdly, that her test comes back positive too. But yeah, my kids have to isolate for 2 weeks, because they didn't get tested because they're really, young. I didn't want to put them through that. So it's all about precaution and not spreading it to people. But yeah, I'm feeling a lot better than I was, when I was going through the worst of it. So it's, but it's weird. I kept my sense of taste the whole way through. I was extremely sore for like 4 days. I felt like I had worked out, but like had pulled muscles and not done it right, not stretched, that kind of thing. That was really the feeling. And then I slept for, 16, 17 hours a day. So that's pretty much what it was. And then sinus congestion and all that crap. So yeah, so pretty wild, man. But I know other people have it a lot worse. So I told my wife, I was like, just be grateful, just be grateful that, that it's that we're not having to go to the ICU, that type of thing. Because a lot of people, I can understand, a lot of people go through it much worse, and I have a lot of empathy for that. So I'm just grateful we didn't get it earlier, to be honest. So, but you can live, you can make it through it. So just lots of hydrating, drinking Gatorade, and Uh, like I said, I threw the ginger ale away. Stuck with water mainly. So, but I'm not drinking any beer tonight. I'm going to give it another week before I get back into that. So,
I will drink enough for both of us.
yeah, yeah. So, hopefully you guys had a good New Year's, Christmas. Obviously, that was mine. I'm curious if you got anything really cool. Jonathan, I know I got you something, and I just got your present to me a couple days ago. So thank you for that. I got some little
The bourbon
whiskey
Buddha.
flavored. Yeah, that's gonna be fun.
Yeah,
So
so you add those into any sort of hard liquor that you want in order to infuse it with a maple or cherry or more of a bourbon flavor.
that's gonna
So
be awesome.
so
So
I'll show this off. This is the
yes,
ale
there it
horn.
is. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
so
And
That looks
I
like a
thought that I
beast.
could I
so
mistakenly thought that I could
we
actually pour just one beer in
yeah.
there and fill it up. I need to pour at least like three more to fill this thing
It's a
up.
man mug.
But I'm going to
So
be drinking out of this tonight.
so my obviously like Facebook is always tracking like what you like looking at and buy and that type of stuff, Amazon and everything else, and so I'm pretty sure that it thinks I'm an alcoholic, because because I'm always getting stuff like that for people that I know. But it's always like esoteric, like vaguely international, like semi well traveled stuff, like Secret Life of Walter Mitty type things. And so I've been seeing that on my feed for the past like 3 months. And it's just this Viking horn. I don't even know what it's made out of, but it looked really cool. It's well
Box, made
marketed.
out of box.
It's made out of ox. Okay, there you go. And I was like, I've got to get this for someone who would like it. And then, so I bought it like months ago. I've just been waiting for the tins to ship. I was like, Christmas, great. I'm pretty sure you got it like 2 weeks ago, right?
The thing is, I feel like there's no way to drink this without making like half of it just supposed to spill over into your beard.
Yeah,
I think that's how it's
I
supposed to
guess that.
go.
Yeah. I mean, like you need to have like a broadsword, right? Like, and a furry vest and stuff, and to have just like killed all the
Claymore,
bees. Yeah,
Claymore,
like you need to have it draped on your
while you're
shoulder.
drinking.
That's great. I
It's
think I
good,
have
yeah.
your next
Awesome.
like 6 presents planned out. So thank you, Facebook, Amazon. Uh,
I saw recently the box that basically it's a man in a box basically where it's like it's knives, hatchets, boots, all kinds of other things like beard combs and beard oil all in one box that you could just ship out to anybody that you felt like you could use that
that's awesome.
stuff. So
That's
easy.
awesome. Awesome. How about you, Josh? How was Christmas for you and New Year's, all that stuff? Was it good?
Yeah, it was good. It was a little peaceful. I mean, it's obviously different with COVID social distancing.
Yeah.
My presents aren't nearly as exciting as what John ended up with. I asked for very practical gifts and happily received them. Running shoes and a shelf in the kitchen,
Oh man. Yeah.
so I can go through the layer of mess that's on the table and get it organized and cleaned up.
That's all. I love to run too, and down here in Florida and stuff. Weather's been great. Obviously, I can't really go too far with the COVID stuff. Like just walking around my neighborhood, but
Mhm.
that's awesome, man. Yeah, it's definitely a good practice. I've been getting into like guided runs and stuff on Nike, so I can't wait to get back to that. And that's like the whole thing with COVID is like, once you get past the initial scare, it's just a lot of like trying to be patient with yourself and all that. So I can't wait to get back to running myself. So one of the things that I got is I got a couple books, and one of them is from Ben Sasse, and it's called Them. And you can take a look at this here. So I think this book has been out for a couple years. It's very much a pre-COVID kind of work, but I think some of the themes are fascinating for us as we go into COVID because they're only exaggerated by what's been going on. And then he's updated it over the past year, I think. So he's got a new preface to it. But Ben Sasse, senator from Nebraska, I personally, I've never met him or talked to him. I'd love to do that. So if we get a chance to interview him sometime in the future, that'd be amazing. But even without that, some really good material that I want to run by you guys. So Ben Sasse is somebody. So this is a look at the book here, who's kind of been uh, not so much a never Trumper per se. But he's certainly someone who straddled the line. He did get endorsed by Trump, which helped him win, his elections and things. But then he's also not served in any positions for Trump because he's wanted to keep an open mind and be able to speak his mind about what Trump does. So he ends up on, sometimes the good sides and the bad sides of Trump supporters and Trump himself. A lot of times he's on the good side. He tends to vote very conservatively in the Senate, and so supports a lot of the legislation that Trump would expect him to support. But then at the same time, again, he keeps his open mind, and sometimes he will criticize the Trump administration, and then of course he gets a huge backlash from that. But definitely an independent thinker, I would say, and a smart guy. I believe he's studied at Harvard, Yale, and Oxford, so he's been around to a lot of top institutions, and he's a homegrown boy from Nebraska. Comes from a middle class family, so at the same time can relate to a lot of everyday folks like us. Here are 3 of my favorite quotes thus far. So I'm almost done with the book, and I'm just going to read them to you guys, and then I'm curious what you think, because what he talks about, the reason he calls the book Them, is the subtitle is Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal. And he goes beyond just, okay, Republicans, Democrats hate each other, elections, they don't like it when they lose. He gets into some of the nitty gritty of how do we start to fix this. And you would think, that he's going to talk about being nice to each other and just, hey, we need to stop yelling at each other. He said early on in the book, just being a little more civil to each other isn't going to fix the underlying causes of what ails us. He has an encounter with a guy in an airport who's like, you're the guy who thinks we should be nice, and you think that's going to fix it? That's going to take a lot more than that, and you need to get rid of all these people. And Senator Sasse is like, no, man, that's not at all, what I'm saying. It goes way deeper than that, and we have reasons to be angry. And then he talked to the guy for, I guess, a couple hours, and came out of it with a better understanding on both sides. So he goes beyond just the basics of civility into what's actually causing us to be so angry and volatile beyond just particular issues. And as he does this, his theory is this quote, the second one: "Our world is nudging us towards rootlessness when only a recovery of rootedness can heal us. What's wrong with America then starts with one uncomfortable word: loneliness." And he talks about this a lot, is that people being isolated. He basically talks about people who are stuck, who can't, be able to get out of poverty and the conditions they find themselves in. He talks about people who are extremely mobile. He talks about himself at times, where he and his wife were just kind of working and then moving, with their company, and they really didn't have time to join a church or any type of community whatsoever, invest in people next to them. And that, that prevents them from actually being able to invest and to build relationships. Yeah. And then he talks about people who are doing well, but they ultimately are isolated because of media and technology. And you can look at us, right? Like, we're talking across state lines. Jonathan, you're in Virginia. Josh is in Oklahoma and stuff like that, and we have community there. But then he says some people, that's all they have. They just have that, or they have their spouse, and that's it. And as men in particular, as they get over 40, don't have any relationships or friends, and that's a struggle. So his quote here, and then I'll turn it over to you guys to get your thoughts, is he ultimately says, "Community is collapsing in America because the rooted are vanishing. The stuck have too many crises in their life to think about much else, and the mobile are too schizophrenic to busy themselves with the care and feeding of their flesh and blood commutes." So what do you think, man? I haven't really gotten to any prescription that he has to fix it yet in the book, but I was just so compelled by that diagnosis of what's going on. And then I thought about how isolated we are given COVID in the past year. That I was just, man, I can't wait to talk to John and Josh about this and get your thoughts. So I want to hear from you, Josh, first, and then John. What do you think? Do you think there's stuff to it? Have you experienced anything like that? Do you know anybody like that? And does it describe our situation, or maybe it's missing some few things? Let me know.
Yeah, and I think I shared this with you briefly before we went on the air that I read the book of them in 2018, I think is when it came out.
Yeah.
Tried to get passed on my podcast, and unfortunately was unsuccessful in doing so. Love the book. It's a great book. As I do share Jonah Goldberg's criticism, which is he was hoping it was a book about the movie by the same name, Them. about giant ants that invade San Francisco. But still a good book.
I have met Jonah Goldberg, and he is hilarious.
He
So
is
I
a
met him.
funny guy.
Yeah, I've met him a few. I'll
Yeah.
see if I can find a picture, but yeah, I met him years ago when I was in college. So he's a good one. But yeah, keep going.
But Them is a good book. Sasse is a good writer. You know, you mentioned up front that he's someone, and I would agree with you. You probably couldn't really label Never Trump. I would say that's because he can be very critical of the president, but most of the time when Sasse speaks, it transcends the issues we're talking about today, or at least the issues that often pass themselves off as political speak. He seems to be someone that has very little interest in patience for what passes itself as political talk. He talks about the future of work. He talks about the divisiveness he talks about in them. He talks about the future of warfare.
Yeah,
We need to be focused on these things in the future. And I do agree with his diagnosis of the problem. I will be curious to hear, Wes, when you finish the book, how encouraged or disappointed you are in his solutions, say, because I think that's the trickier part. And this, of course, is something you've all then tried to tackle in his book, Time to Build, as similar messages, but what do we do about it? It's a little tough.
yeah. I think, and I don't want to get ahead of myself because I haven't gotten to those latter chapters. Maybe we can talk about that next week. But that's a big one. Is what do you do? It's in academic worlds. It is so easy to point out a problem, and they spend a lot of time doing that. Social Dilemma. We've talked about that before on this show. Is an amazing documentary, but 90% of it plus is focused on the problem. Just getting their heads around the problem, and it's when you start to propose a solution that all of a sudden, that criticism, that well-developed critical eye in academia now like feasts on that, right? And
and I would point out too, the other problem is, as Sasse eloquently points out in the book, the solution is not policy. The solution is not political.
Right.
And so that makes it even harder. What do we do about this? Well, there isn't, it turns out, a golden answer from a political program.
Yeah.
It turns out it's going to have to come from a bottom-up roots development of communities and strengthening. And there is no federal. I mean, there may be some things the government can do to help that, but it's ultimately going to have to be something outside of government.
Yeah. What do you think, John?
A lot of thoughts. My thoughts initially went, as you were bringing up this problem of isolation and loneliness, to just, as you know, like I have a master's degree in counseling. So I did a lot of college counseling at VCU, and my internship was a wide range of topics. But of course, like, students were struggling even prior to COVID, struggling even more so after COVID. And I just think about like all of my direct reports at the library, and I had like a counseling session, just impromptu, with I think almost all of them, where I had to basically like take them out of the library and say, if you want to talk, like, let's talk about this, because they were all going through some particular issue, whether it was related to depression or it was related to fear or just isolation for their 14-day period if they were diagnosed and stuff. So I mean, it is definitely affecting everybody, and like you say, Josh, like the solution isn't really political. It's not in policy. I think it's just in. Right now, at least for me, on a local level, it's just in listening and just being able to hear people and what they're struggling with in their own situations. I know once you brought the social dilemma, and that's immediately where my mind went to.
Yeah.
Like we talked about a few weeks prior, I tested myself for a day and found that, like, I was putting in like 6 hours of screen time on my phone, and I still have, kids that I'm looking after and work, and it was just ridiculous how much I end up isolating myself on a mental level, away from, like, even if I am isolated at home from my friends, I'm isolating myself from my family, and that's not good. I'm wondering how that bridge of isolation leads into just this spiral of this us and them mentality, that because I get isolated and then I feed myself. I think, the social dilemma talks about you get fed with only the views that you care about, the views that support your own. And that way you can't understand how anybody would think differently. And then you get stuck in that rut.
Yeah. He talks about, in particular, men struggle with this. They struggle with, as they get older, the data points to men are quick to say the only friend I have, close friend I have, is my wife, as they get older, if they are married, right? And whereas women still have like several close relationships, that they would identify with. And so why is that? Because he looks at data from, not him personally, but different think tanks that he's connected to. He looks at data from decades ago where men, would say much more quickly, hey, I have 3 or 4 close friends, So he's like, why is that trickling away, down to essentially nothing? And how purposeful are we in terms of relationship? We tend to be more activity based, There's a book that he cites that's called Bowling Alone, where, he looks at the number of people that are bowling, in the country. And that percentage is very similar to what it used to be in the 70s and 80s. But back then, people would say, yep, I'm on a bowling team. I'm on a bowling league. I do it with my church friends, or I do it with my buddies, from the country club, whatever it is. Now people are, oh yeah, I bowl, but just, by myself. So people are still doing fun things. They're just not doing it with anyone else, and that really sums up the problem, because then it translates to, how do we treat other people? Well, if we don't have many relationships with other people who believe differently than us, if we don't have many solid relationships, period, but definitely not with people who are different, then how can we possibly, understand where they're coming from, or give them any type of, empathy whatsoever? And I guess, that's the difference. We were at church a couple weeks ago, and I guess it's been months, now when he said it, but our pastor said, if you're in a Bible study and you find yourself agreeing with everything that everyone says all the time, then I want you to look at going to a different Bible study so that you can be challenged, and so that you can challenge others, right? Like, as you grow in your beliefs. And I think what he's talking about is sort of a paralysis. If we just get into the old routine and we do what's easy, and we stop growing, and it's hard, you got to intentionally do it. You got to take a trip, take it. Well, obviously, with COVID, it's hard, but try to find people who disagree and figure out how to engage with them, whether that's a trip online, and you specifically go to places that are different, talk to people that are different, or whether that's physically, going and taking your Viking mug, to where it belongs in the Nordic. I don't know.
Wes, you brought that up because just a couple of nights ago, I was having, it's within our social circle. We had about 2 families that we talked to. We brought one other guy in. He was like one of the small group leaders for our church, that we had attended. And it was right there where me, my friend, and then, him, the Bible study leader. And both me and my friend have basically said that, like, hey, we're going to start looking for another small group to go to right now. And it's nothing against you. It's nothing against like what you're doing there. It's that, like, we're not challenging each other. We're not growing together, despite the effort that we put into it. We're always agreeing, and we're not actually like discussing the things that we really need to discuss. And we've given that enough chances to be able to allow for that. And now that it's not happening, like, we need to be able to split and find some other place to grow. So, it's a hard decision to make. It's not easy. You still want to hold those friendships and those bonds together. But at some point, you need to be able to have this end game of like, okay, what's the next step for us? And it's among other things too. My wife needs to feel a little bit more connected than she is. But it's a hard decision to make, to say, I want to actually find people where they're all having a dynamic discussion that is not always, it's Jesus, like, no, sometimes it's like, I have this deep fear about, one particular, ideology, and you have something different, but we can still talk about that. And it requires a sacrifice, I think, of comfort.
What do you think, Josh?
Sasse has an interesting line in the book where he talks about, if you disagree with someone, or if you approach, say, a book in which you believe you disagree with the person, your brain is naturally going to be scanning it for a sentence or phrase that sticks out and affords you the justification for just dismissing the entire book.
Yeah.
And he even says, hey, I do this too. And I think that's true. We all do it. Like, if I were to read, say, I don't know, the Communist Manifesto, I'm probably not going to be completely objective. And that's not on the surface completely bad. That's how our brains work, and it works that way for a reason. If every piece of information we approach with complete non-bias, I think we go crazy, because we have to make order and sense of things and fit it into our worldview somehow. But I think that the trick there is to walk the tightrope. to not give up, to not be empty-minded or open-minded, but to be receptive of having your views challenged.
Yeah, I mean, that's really good point. And starting to kind of go beyond the book, or from what I've seen in it so far, I think a huge part of this is a sense of intellectual adolescence, some growing pains, and things, because the whole modern concept, modernity in general, a lot of that was based off of many assumptions that I don't know how completely true they are. There's a lot of goodness in them, but you go back to Descartes, the philosopher who said, "I think, therefore I am." That's not exactly a Christian thought. A Christian thought would be, in the beginning, God, said you were. He created you, as opposed to thinking yourself, into a sense of awareness, right? He kind of
The
relates.
irony there is almost 1,000 years before Descartes said that, St. Augustine said that.
Yeah, right, right.
Has a really similar argument in the City of God, but
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt.
No, no, you're fine. It's that sense of indebtedness that we need to have. And sure, yeah, it comes from Christians as well. There's been many Christian, modernists and things like that, that I struggle with, is when you lose that sense of indebtedness, of your perspective. It opens you up to a lot of arrogance, and I think there has been a lot in the modern sense over time, is thinking that we understand everything, thinking that the scientific method is going to solve all of our problems, as opposed to where we are in the past 30, 40 years, where you've got quantum mechanics and general relativity from Einstein, dark energy, dark matter, all these things that we realize we can only account for a very small percentage, of the mass of the universe. Where's the rest of it? And so many things that we don't know. And then you get beyond that to simply science itself, and the ability to try to defend that as a perspective is increasingly difficult for many people. It's a useful tool, but not much more. And so anyway, this whole postmodern phase that we're going to, because I think people are hungry for, just give it to me straight, right? Give me straight talk, give me objective truth, give me what's real, right? But even no matter how hard I try to do that, to tell it to you straight, to tell you exactly what's going on, it's still going to be my perspective mixed in. Now I can talk to somebody else and they can tell me what they think, and hey, we agree, and okay, now we've got a little bit more. But at the end of the day, we're still human beings, right? We're still human beings trying to make sense of this life, and doing the best we can. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from, is with so many voices, so much news, so many different perspectives. And Sasse does talk about this in the book. You get overloaded. You get overloaded by the constant stream that's coming through, Facebook and your phone, and everybody's got an opinion about everything. How do you actually find the experts? It's tough. It's tough for people to navigate that world when, not so many years ago, you had to go to a library, to talk to actually hear from an expert.
Right.
You had to figure out, in the paper, what happened on the game yesterday if you didn't watch it on TV. And now it's sending you alerts to your watch, telling you to check it because it just happened, 2 seconds ago. So it's just this saturation that I think has exacerbated the shift from a modern perspective to a postmodern one. And I think we're living in that. Now, I would tell you guys, as in my profession that I've had in the military, we are expected to go through all kinds of information to get to and they put us through all kinds of training for this. So it's one of these things where I think that it's a skill that you can develop. And I think getting more towards a solution is, I think that we have to equip people, demonstrate the skill of being able to deduce what is true from what is untrue, and realizing that truth itself is a moving target. It's one of those things that, think about it. You even when you look at it from a religious perspective, you start to learn things about God that you didn't know before. You start to see things differently than maybe when you were a child. You see things that you struggle with, as you get older. You have to deal with death in your family, or you deal with COVID, right? Like, and then all of a sudden, God, why did you allow this? And that's part of your growth in your relationship, with Him.
Mm.
Somebody lets you down at church, it's just not what you thought it was, or your church shifts. You say you deal with this with the relationships with your spouse. It's constantly this growth in your life, and if you're expecting everything to be easy, you're going to be mistaken. So that's kind of a long rant there, but that's kind of what I see going on too.
Yeah, Josh, I was thinking about what you were talking about not, you probably wouldn't be able to have a completely objective perspective now reading, something as, say, something like the Communist Manifesto. But hopefully, there was some point, like what we, hope for in our growth and development as human beings, that there's at least some point in your life that you can kind of that you can point to and say, that's when I made this decision to be who, part of who I am, be a conservative, or entertain the notion that I am wrong about this before, solidifying your viewpoint and saying this is who I am. If you've never had that almost existential moment in your life where you're like questioning, everything, like am I in Matrix? Like questioning, pretty much all that you are, then I think that it's high time that needs to happen. But for those people that it hasn't happened to yet, like that's where I question, how much are you actually part of the system as opposed to being out of it. The other thing I wanted to talk about too is when I was one of the best classes that I was ever part of was called adult development. It's premised that you're a constant learner, no matter whether you're young, middle-aged or old. You're always learning, you're always growing, you're always developing. So we would read, stories like The Kite Runner or Tuesdays with Maury, and about all these just different points of, life development in characters' lives, some fiction and some nonfiction. But the most, crucial thing was that people make, very, very important decisions in their life, and they have, their own testimonies about how they came to be, who they are. And we lose that. We lose that when we, just try to get a snapshot of people's lives in social media, or we lose that when we don't really connect to people that, requires time and relationship to actually build. If you're just trying to grab one civil discussion, it's just probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
But one of the assignments in the class was to find, different people in different age groups and ask them about the decisions that they've made in their life and how they've come to be who they are. And have multiple interviews with them to get to know them and then write a report on that. And I thought that was actually pretty cool. It just showed you how much human relationship requires time and investment. And, that the connection actually is almost a sacrifice now in relation to how instantaneous we think everything needs to be in our lives.
Yeah.
So just a little bit of food for thought there.
Very cool. You talk about education, and it makes me think there was this like comic or cartoon that I looked at on the paper one time, and it was basically these two people arguing in a university, and one of them they were both professors, and it was like 1960, and one of them was like, "We need more STEM." That's what's going to give us jobs. Enough of these humanities and their crap. And the other guy, I guess, was a humanities professor. And he was like, no, don't do this. And then it was like 20 years later. And then he's like, we need more STEM. So now it's like 1980. That's it's giving us jobs and we need more. And I was like, please stop. Don't forget about the humanities. And then it was like 2000, right? And they're like, we need more STEM. I keep telling you, this is what's going to give us jobs. And then it was like 2020. And then the guy who was calling for more STEM was like, why is our democracy failing? The humanities professor was like, right? If you don't, which isn't to take anything away from the hard sciences and the jobs that they create, but if that's all you have, right? If you think about it, if someone doesn't, they take the hard sciences and that's it. And then, they don't get that out of high school, then they'll go through their entire life without any of these great books or the perspective or wrestling with these existential questions of why do I believe what I believe, right? Like if you never get any of those classes, then you stay in that perspective unless you take it upon yourself, to get, and a lot of people don't, I think. And so, for me, I don't think I ever really hit some of those points that you talk about, John, until college. When I took philosophy classes with guys and girls who were atheist and agnostic and everything else, right? And then they were starting to ask these hard questions that I had never gotten, in my life.
Mhm.
What if you had been born in a different country? What if you were from Pakistan? Would you still be a Christian? And I was like, man, no one's ever asked me. They did not talk about that on Sunday morning, at church. Um, Wrestling with
Right.
those things, I think, is important. Christopher Souza from our other show just posted a comment. He said he watched the Social Dilemma documentary. He says, I think there are solutions that tech companies can implement to stop the paths to radicalization that exist online. But he says that he is less optimistic about solutions to make social media less addictive. And I agree. It kind of is the paradigm. That's why I do what I do, with you guys and with our other show as well. I think it's important to have shows like this where we kind of inwardly look at conservatism. We look at these ideas. Ben Sasse being, a conservative, right? Like we look at his material, we talk about it. But then I love our other show as well with Chris, with Kyle, right? With having
Mhm.
a libertarian and a liberal. I had somebody message me on the website earlier today, and he was like, "Why did you interview George Will? He's an atheist. He's not even a Republican anymore. He's not a conservative, really. Like, he doesn't see himself the same way. Why would you do that? That's not, he's not Burkean." And I kind of agree with you. I think he's more of a James Madison type guy, and that's what he says. But I was like, that person doesn't have to be Burkean for me to interview him, man. Come on, right? And it's the same as I would interview just about anybody who's going to be civil because I feel like I have something to learn and, hopefully something to share as well. So I try to demonstrate that with this forum that we have. That's why I'm so grateful to have you on it, John, as well as you, Josh. And I see you doing that with your project as well. So.
One thing about the social dilemma that I was disappointed with is at the very end, like you said, Wes, it's like the solutions, like, it's easy to point out all the problems, but to point out the solutions is so much harder. And you've even got these developers, from Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and such that manages the finances and even the like button and all kinds of stuff. And they're out there basically saying like, try to have some more responsibility about putting your phone down. Just like when 20 minutes later, even like the president of like I think Twitter was like saying how he was
He
falling
couldn't
into
even
the
do it. Yeah, I saw that.
he couldn't even do it. He couldn't even leave it out of his bedroom. So that's the problem. I think that not that it's all in policy, but that these companies aren't being held to a certain restriction about how much they're making humanity a product. But it certainly makes us like, awareness, the awareness, the self-consciousness about it needs to be there, in the forefront of your mind. But I think that just more of this emphasis of not being used, not letting your information being abused and learning the value of the connection that you can have outside the world. Although that's the reason it's hard is because of COVID, because you can't go out there without giving it.
Yeah. I think, to his credit, I think Donald Trump has tried to offer a solution to this problem. And it's not something that, I always agree with, but I hear people like, I went to the Donald Trump rally and it was so much fun. It was joyful and there was music and like people were cheering and they were laughing, they were having a good time. There was this sense of community there. And then he like shows up and he gets you real angry, about whatever, the Nancy Pelosi this and Chuck Schumer that, but there's this sense of we're doing something positive. We're making America great. And we hate these people over here because they're liberal, whatever. But he's created a sense of community. People identify with that tribe. And I think Sass calls it, somewhat of an anti-tribe as well. But there is, I think Trump has studied this, this problem, in his own way. And he's saying, I'm going to create a movement where people feel like, they belong, right? And I think that's the ticket, but I also think that you can do one that's greater than just right wingers, right? You can have that. We can have this show. He's got his, thousands of people at rallies. You can do it, but I think that what's missing is creating as well, maybe not as tightly knit, but still creating an ethic that includes all Americans. And I think that's where I struggle with them. I don't mind doing rallies. That's cool. Seeing a bunch of Republicans get together and win an election, or at this point, fight about some of the previous elections. I agree with that. That's a great thing. But when you get to the point where you can't have that with all Americans, where all of his rallies, it seems like now are always about him and his presidency and all that stuff, and he's tried to do a few with the military, I know. but having more rallies that also include people that you disagree with, to allow, even if that debate isn't always an easy one to have. So
Yeah, I think there's also a shallowness that comes with that sense of community as you're describing it. There's even dating sites, more than one. I looked this up once, multiple dating sites based on one's allegiance to Trump, that you
sure,
can date other people
believe
who
it.
are Trump supporters. And that is a community of a sense. And it is not that there is no value to it. It's that I don't think this is a controversial point. Maybe it is. There are way too many people that is their deepest sense of community.
Yes.
Or it's taking the place of, I mean, we see this in evangelical circles, taking the place of Christianity. We see this in politics, it's taking the place of conservatism.
Yeah.
And that's a very shallow thing to hold your community in.
I think that's very well said, Josh. And I think that's where Ben Sasse would put it too. And I think that's why he says the solution isn't political, because the problem itself looks like it's political, but it's not. It's more of a projection, right? And I think that's where it starts. Is having why do people look forward more to a Trump rally than their church community, right? Or why do they spend more time with it? Things like that. And maybe they're getting more out of they feel like it relates to them more. It's more exciting. And maybe there are some things that we can do in our deeper sense, of community. I remember back, and John will remember this too, is our dad's been a youth minister his whole life, right? That's what he did for decades. And he would create these, he would call them retreats, which is basically these trips. And he would just take a bunch of kids, get, cabins out in the woods, and then set them up, and then just let them go for a week with some loose structures, some fun games, worship nights, because it was a church thing. And people would have the most fun. And he never had any trouble getting people to sign up for these things, because they were like, oh, and they called it expedition, right? Like, oh, we're going to go on expedition, and it's going to be so much fun. And my dad was like, and people would be like, I had this amazing week, and, I connected with God in ways I never had. And, I decided to talk to my dad again, even though, we've been fighting. And, and I also got a new girlfriend, right? Like, it was an amazing time. George is a genius. That's our dad's name. He's a genius. I tell you, you're a genius putting this thing together. And dad's like, I don't have to do anything. I just got you away from your laptops and your phones and, so, your other environments, and then just let you be in an environment with nature and, walk around outside, getting some exercise with
Basically Walden for Christians, essentially.
yeah. And I think that's what we need. I think the biggest thing that Trump does is he has events, right? He has these dedicated rallies, and then he puts on a little bit of a show, and I think there's something to be said for it, because people, they go to it, and they're physically there, and they've left their home, they've left their TV and all that stuff, and they feel like they're part of it. And there's something to be said for doing that type of thing, whether it's, politics or church or whatever. And I think we need to, as COVID starts to, slowly be evaporated with the vaccine and everything else, I think that's something we should take a hard look at, is how do we do that? And maybe we will. Maybe we'll have a renewed appetite for that type of thing. We've gotten our fill of isolation. We've gotten our fill of technology. So, maybe that's something that
I think it's a good time too, just to try to reconnect, bonds that you might have had that, you haven't held up, in regards to, like, just making some phone calls to people that you haven't checked in on in a while. Not just comment on their feed, but actually, like, give them a call. So, I was thinking about, there's a guy that I went to high school with, and then we stayed connected through college, and then even after. And, we every now and again, like, even there might be a month where we don't really talk, but we went through pretty much this entire 2020 where we just didn't talk. But we didn't have a falling out. Life just kind of got busy, moving, COVID, jobs, virtual learning. It all kind of, like, the day just feels so scripted. And, like, on Christmas Eve, I gave him a call, and he was just like, "Hey, I've been waiting for you to call. I'm so happy that you did." And, like, we just started, and we've gotten into the routine again of just chatting it up. And so I think that just being able to reconnect to people that you need to is also a good time to do this year.
Yeah, it's like it's a very different version of Any Given Sunday. The relationships we need are all around us, right? There's.
It sounds so silly, but, like, it's also kind of hard to do. Like, I basically had to tell him, I was like, dude, I wasn't mad. I was just like, I was just done. I didn't call you because I was always tired, too busy. It's not an excuse. It's just, I'm sorry, and we just rolled with it. But it's not always comfortable to do
It's not always easy. It takes dedicated effort, and it's much easier to just let's see what's going on my news feed. The genuine relationships. It's just not something that we spend effort on. But I think if we can offer anything to people, then it has the potential to start to get them out of the rut and open their perspective. The best moment I've ever had doing this, with the podcast and everything else, was when someone I think his name was Roger, tuned into our election show, and maybe he's watching live now. I don't know, but he was like, I watched your entire show that went on for like over an hour. And he was like, at the end of it, I don't know what it was, but I felt less angry and less scared, about life. And we, as you know, John, like we didn't have a lot of deep material on it at all. Like we were just playing games and like tallying votes and like having fun. But that to me was the best compliment I've ever heard through all of this. And I was like, well, thank you. Like that's it. Like sure, we're still gonna, fight liberals and contest things and all that stuff, but just the notion that like being in our presence and being in community with us, like makes you feel more excited about life is exactly it. So it's not always, there's a level of intention that I'm going to do this, but then it doesn't have to be this, and now I will be your friend. Like here we go. Think about it, right? Like it can be a very fun and enjoyable thing once you get there, So anyway, we'll see. I'm going to finish up the book, here tomorrow. So, I'm glad you had a chance to do it. Maybe we'll get a chance to interview Ben Sasse, in the coming year. I'd certainly love that. But I have just as much fun talking to you guys. I want you to know that. So this is very enjoyable to me, and I appreciate getting a chance to do this every week. So, Josh from Saving Elephants podcast, amazing project, great interviews. Always love having you on the show. Thanks for all the insights that you brought tonight. And then John, of course, as well, always here, always very insightful as well. So for those watching, BerkingConservative.com on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. Let us know what topics. We've got everything from, the books that we talked about tonight. I know there's been some movies that come out. We can talk about that. Like I said, I'm going to watch me some Cobra Kai, see what season 3 is all about.
Season 3.
If there's any topics that you guys want to cover, I know this week is going to be a big one in DC with the election showdown and, what's Mike Pence going to do and all that. So I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about next week as that starts to roll out and we see what the future is going to look like. Certainly going to be interesting up there. But thank you guys so much for the show. Thanks for being on here, and I will see you guys next week.
Always a pleasure.